Hello and welcome back to Catch and Cook California. I'm Kevin, and this is video number 1 in my new series, Mushroom Foraging for Beginners. In each episode, we're going to explore a new species, and I'm going to show you key features that allow you to distinguish that edible species from potential toxic or even poisonous lookalikes. At the end of each video, we're going to do a gourmet taste test. And since this is video number 1, we're going to start with one of my all-time favorite mushrooms, the golden chanterelle. Let's go. This series is a kickoff point. You really need formal training, whether you come out with me and do some mushroom identification courses or whether you go out with a local mycological society. Even after that, you need to use a good mushroom identification book. The books I recommend are by David Arora, All That the Rain Promises and More, and Mushrooms Demystified. However, using a book incorrectly will still likely get you the wrong mushroom, which can straight up kill you. So, be sure you are 100% positive on what attribute the author is discussing if it is the difference between one species and another. When in doubt, throw it out. I was looking for any kind of leaf litter with a potential little hint of gold. How awesome is that? So I need to be very careful where I'm stepping. I'm not kidding. 6 inches forward, 6 inches in front of that. Last time we almost stepped on like 5 or 6. Let's keep an eye out. There's one right up in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to uncover the mushroom, pull it out. I want the whole thing for identification purposes, and I'm going to cover it back over. Even though I know that there could be more in here, I'm not going to clear cut the ground. I'm not going to rake all of this away, because if I do, I can damage the mycelium, and the mycelium is what fruits into mushrooms. So I could actually kill the chanterelle mycelium if I do that. So I'll just look a little here, cover it back up. Look a little here, cover it back up. That way it stays sustainable. Where were you? Oh, there you are. Oh, there's another one. One right there. One of my favorite things about this is it doesn't matter how old you are. It gets everybody on their hands and knees, crawling around in the woods, just like we wanted to or did when we were kids. It's like an Easter egg hunt for adults. What an exceptional day. We got some really nice ones here. Before I talk about how to clean these up and removing any kind of dirty portions, I want to make sure you keep the base of the stem for identification purposes. Don't rely on an app. These are the books that I recommend. The way I do this in my mushroom identification courses is I recommend All That the Rain Promises and More by David Arora. We use specific attributes or key features that you can observe to take you to specific families of mushrooms. Once you're there, in this case the chanterelles, there will be more features that you can look at to determine if this is in fact the species you think it is. If you would like to learn more on how to use this book, this is what I emphasize in my mushroom identification courses. It is probably the most important thing I can possibly teach. Alright, let's talk about some key attributes. If you look very closely, a true chanterelle will actually have thick gills we refer to as primitive gills. Not thin-edged, and they will not turn like pages in a book. Instead, they're very thick, rubbery, often branching and interconnected, and they will run from the cap down onto the stem. The top of the cap is going to be smooth. Cap is bright orange to yellow orange and usually slightly concave and wavy when mature. The gills are typically the same color as the cap or slightly lighter, and the stalk is usually the same color as the cap or slightly paler. But not always. You can see that this stalk is a little bit darker. What's also very interesting about this particular one is you can see it has stretch marks. That's because the mushroom itself was growing faster than its skin could deal with, and so it actually split and cracked in here. So you can see there's sort of stretch marks here, and then over here not so much. You can see those gills going right down onto the stalk, and you don't get those stretch marks till down here. It's also very important to distinguish between those stretch marks and the scaly rings that are very indicative of the base of some Amanita family mushrooms. It'll always be growing on the ground, and the stalk itself is going to have pale whitish flesh to whitish yellow. You'll also notice that when it breaks in a somewhat tattered fashion. It does not snap open cleanly in a 90 degree like a piece of chalk. At least some tattering. Now I want to show you what a false chanterelle looks like in contrast. False chanterelle is going to have true gills, not primitive gills, so they will be thin-edged and they will move like pages in a book, more on the orange to orangish brown, but they do look pretty similar from a distance. I also want to introduce you to the jack-o'-lantern, which is another species that some people confuse with these. They definitely have true gills. The jack-o'-lantern is often clustered and growing on wood, but again, some people do confuse it. On very rare occasions, you'll find true chanterelles like these that are actually fused, but in the beginning, just avoid chanterelles that are fused. The top of the cap is going to be smooth. It is not going to have any uplifted fibers or scales, which are very common among the scaly chanterelle, which is a cousin in the same family but is not edible. Alright, key features of the golden chanterelle. We have primitive gills, so they're actually fleshy and kind of thick-edged, almost rubber-like. They're typically branching and interconnected. They're going to run from the cap down onto the stem. Cap and stem is one piece, yellowish in color. The flesh is going to be whitish in color, and when you break the stem, it's going to break in a tattered fashion. It's not going to snap open 90 degrees clean like a piece of chalk. It smells kind of fruity. Absolutely incredible mushroom. And in this case, it's growing under oak. The wrong mushroom can kill you. If there's ever an attribute that you're not sure about, that means you're in doubt. In this game, we don't round up. Even if you're 99% positive on your identification, you're still 1% unsure. When in doubt, throw it out. We're going to use this knife with the brush. We're going to clean the top off. You can also get a towel damp and just kind of wipe it down. I really don't like to rinse them because they tend to soak up water pretty quickly. A lot of wild mushrooms will do that. It may be dirt, but it's earth. It's not exactly dirty the same way as a city alley dirt. So we're just going to give it a nice little brush to clean it up initially in the field, and that way it's going to make it a little easier to fully clean when we bring it home. And I'm just going to trim off any of these darker portions that might have just a little bit of earth adhered to them. And that way, if I were to get a few of them and drop them in a basket or a container, that dirt at the bottom is not going to fall into the gills of all the other ones, and it'll make cleaning much easier at home. Now I mentioned I was going to circle back to this cleaning and trimming of the mushroom, so I will remove the base of the mushroom and trim it up. But remember, always bury those little trimmings, especially if you're anywhere near a major trail. Those are breadcrumbs, and they may lead the wrong type of forager to your favorite spot. I also do not recommend using plastic bags to transport mushrooms because they tend to make them sweat. I prefer paper bags. Baskets are good too, but paper bags are more discreet. The reason I stopped here, I was driving by public land where I know it's legal to forage for mushrooms. But then I saw some of these old oaks. I tend to find edible species of mushroom growing under most species of California oaks. And these old coast live oaks, are no exception. The classic shape of a coast live oak. That is a coast live oak. Notice these little thorn-like arrangements on the edge of the leaf that will poke you. The southern portions of the tree are going to be bare of moss, but the northern portions are typically quite mossy. We'll talk more about that and natural navigation in a coming video, which will be mushroom foraging for survival. We'll do a 24-hour overnight with the types of items I recommend you carry in your kit just in case you get lost. Time to hike back out and do some cooking. I want to give this a little taste test. Do something nice and gourmet. This is a little treat that I make a lot of times for clients who have come out to my mushroom identification courses. We're doing a little gourmet Italian style mushroom crostini. As we're walking out though, I just wanted to briefly mention that, growing up in the United States, I came from a very fungophobic society. Most people growing up would tell me, don't ever eat wild mushrooms. If you do, you will die. And then you'd always hear these follow-up stories about how there was this professional mycologist, someone who studies mushrooms, who went out to get their edible mushrooms, and they've been doing it for 50 years, and then they fed them to their family, and they all died. And I'm not trying to make light of these stories, because these stories are real, and they are real warnings, and you need to heed those warnings just like I do. And growing up, I was very fearful of the idea of foraging for my own mushrooms. Red shoulder hawk again. So it's good to be fearful in a sense. It's actually better to be cautious rather than fearful, and to use what we know that we could potentially be poisoned if we eat the wrong thing. We should use that as a cautionary note to influence our decisions and influence the way that we proceed in mushroom foraging for the future. It wasn't until I got into college that I met a few people who were doing this, and I told them, you're insane, you're gonna die. I had just finished up my undergrad up in Humboldt. We got a break in the rains. We went out to do some archaeology, and the guys I was with, they were like, once we're done documenting this site, if you look around, there's hedgehogs and golden chanterelles all through here. We're gonna pick some. And I told them, you're insane, you're gonna die. And they said, without a doubt, there is no toxic lookalike for the hedgehog. We want to show you how we know for sure that those are edible, and then we're gonna pick them, and you can do whatever you want. We'll talk about hedgehogs in a future episode, but anyway, long story short, I picked some with them, took them home, keyed them out, and they were right. There's no toxic lookalike. So I cooked them, and I ate just a little bit. The next morning I woke up, and I felt fine. So I cooked up a little bit more. By the afternoon, I felt fine. The next evening, cooked up all of them and put them over a steak. And I'll tell you right here and now, I didn't even like mushrooms growing up. And in that moment, tasting wild mushrooms, better texture and better flavor than I'd ever had from any mushroom in the store. And it was like, boom, epiphany. Everything changed from that moment on. I kind of dipped my toes in the water of mushroom foraging in that moment, but I really have David Aurora to thank for this mushroom journey that I've been able to continue on. And that's because of his books. And as sure as I'm standing here today talking to you, if you use those books correctly, and you understand the terminology in those books, and you are meticulous, you take your time, you'll be all right. This part is essential, so don't add any oil to the pan. You want to dry saute this first. Get your pan nice and hot, throw your chanterelles in there, pretty thick pieces, keep them widely spaced. This goes for any other mushroom as well. By keeping them widely spaced and keeping those pieces thick, you're going to have a lot of good texture afterwards, and it's not going to boil the mushrooms. Instead, the dry saute will sort of force all of the liquid out of the mushroom first. It's going to cook off super quickly around those mushrooms. As soon as it goes dry, throw some oil in there and start adding everything else to it. Otherwise you have boiled mushrooms rather than sauteed mushrooms. Add a little bit of salt. Starting to dry up now. Time to add the oil. my herbs in there, garlic, shallots, butter, salt, pepper, chanterelles. Beautiful. Last thing to do, I'm going to put a little bit of goat cheese on those crostini, throw these on there, top it with a little balsamic and some finishing salt. Alright, not too crazy with the goat cheese. You want a thin layer on here. You don't want it to just completely dominate. Real thin, just like that. This is the brand that I love, Montchevre. These guys, they know what's up. I was a shepherd for a summer, you might not know that. As a result, I like for my goat cheese to not taste the way that goats smell. So, this is a nice clean goat cheese. The last thing is some balsamic vinegar. Diane convinced me to start using these little guys so I can just give little drip drip drips. That way it doesn't overdo it. Last thing, some finishing salt. Sprinkle it from higher up and then it's more evenly distributed on your food. And that is the crostini. Taste test time. I love it. There's all this fog in the air, it's just about to rain. More mushrooms are soon to come. Look at that. Wow. I came up with this just kind of on a whim. I was throwing stuff together and I thought, okay, salt, fat, acid, and heat. So we got a little bit of salt on there for finishing, but also we use salt to draw out the moisture from the mushroom. There's a little bit of salt also in that cheese. The fat is also in the cheese. A little bit of fat that we cooked it in, hint of oil, hint of butter. The acid comes from that balsamic vinegar. Heat, there's just a little bit of black pepper in there. It's almost indetectable, but trust me, it adds a layer of flavor in there that is definitely necessary. It's got that herbal bouquet that kind of takes it to the next level. By cooking the shallots and the garlic, it takes a little bit of the spice off of that, but really rounds out those flavors. All of that together, and then you get the texture and the balance of the crunch of that crostini with that nice creaminess, that butteriness of the goat cheese, and then you get that chewiness and then the flavor of the umami from that mushroom. And I gotta be honest, everything about this on every level is freaking delicious. And I've had so many clients request, can you please share the recipe? So, very first one in this series, mushroom identification and mushroom foraging, I wanted to share this recipe because it's easy to do in the woods, it's easy to do at home, and it's freaking delicious. So the last thing I want to say is just about the texture and flavor of golden chanterelles. A lot of people talk about matsutake, they talk about porcini. To me, the golden chanterelle is one of the finest mushrooms we have in California. I look forward to chanterelle season every single year. That right there is incredible. It's got a wonderful texture to it, a wonderful umami flavor to it, all around one of my favorite mushrooms. And so, it's the mushroom I decided to start this series with. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, then I hope you're very excited about this series. Consider subscribing, share this video with other folks that you know who might be interested in mushroom identification or mushroom foraging. Please like, leave a comment, subscribe, click that bell-shaped notification icon so that you'll know when my next video drops. And until next time, keep the old ways alive.